Hello. Hello. I'm hoping everybody can see and hear me. Welcome to this week 2 webinar for the Power BI course. I hope you're enjoying the course so far, and I hope you've managed to follow along with it. I was going to start with an apology. Apologies for introducing measures so early into the course. Measures, as you probably realise if you've seen the course, aren't particularly easy, and I was hoping to leave those until a little bit later on in the course. But I introduced them during week 2 because I felt we needed to. So if you've covered that bit of the course in week 2 and you haven't understood measures, don't worry. We will be coming back to measures a lot later on in the course because they're a really key and core part of how we can use Power BI. So apologies for doing that, but don't get scared of measures just because we introduce them so early. Okay, right, I'm going to share my screen with you in a minute, and I was planning for this first part of the webinar to show you some tips for understanding how Power BI visuals work. The things that I've found very useful as I've been learning Power BI, and I thought I'd pass them on to you as like tools and techniques for really understanding how Power BI is working behind the scenes. Because once we understand how it works behind the scenes, we can hopefully create better visuals on the back of that. So I'm going to share my screen now. So just bear with me for one moment while I do that. And I'm going to go to Power BI. Oops, still not shared my screen. Just bear with me for a moment. My screen full size. Whoop, try that. There we go. Okay. Hopefully you've got my screen in front of you there. And what I've got here really is what we've been working on during the course of this week. So if you have been following along bit by bit with what I've been doing, then you probably got a front page to our report that possibly looks something like that. Don't worry if you've not. What we're going to do this afternoon is completely independent of what you can now see on the screen. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new tab on this report, or a new page down at the tabs at the bottom here. If I just click on that, we'll get a blank screen. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a recommendation to you that when you're learning Power BI, I think the most useful visualization, and I haven't mentioned this in the lectures, but I might add to these lectures later and introduce people to this concept, but I think the most useful visualization for learning Power BI is called a table visualization. It's one of these here. You can see where I'm hovering the mouse there on the screen. So I'm going to put this onto the sheet of paper, whatever, that we have for Power BI. And also, just so you can see it a little bit better, I know it's a small monitor this, so I'm going to click on actual size there. So you can see hopefully what I've got in a little bit more clarity down there. This is a table visualization. So there's the placeholder for a table visualization, as you can see. And what it allows us to do is it allows us to see our data as it is, as a table. All our data is stored as tables, and a table visualization allows us to see it as a table. I'll show you what I mean. Let's go to pupil data. Here's pupil data down the side. And let's just put external ID on here. Now, table visualization is exactly the same as most other visualizations. The key box that we have to fill out is this values one here. And like I've done for a lot of the visualizations in the course, I'm just going to put external ID in the values there and release it. And you can see what happens as soon as we do that. There we go, we get external ID. So this represents a pupil. In fact, we can see what pupil this actually represents if alongside external ID, whoops, if I just select the visual again, if alongside external ID, I put the student name in there. It just says student there, but you'll see that's actually the student name. There we go. So you can start to see what this is doing. I put gender on there as well. It's creating for us a little table that reflects the data that we have in our original mark sheet. I'm just going to move student up there. And if you followed the course so far, we'll talk about external ID, and we use external ID to count up how many pupils there are in any particular graph. And we talk about the external ID column here, and we talk about changing it so that it gives us the count of pupil IDs. Well, by using a table in this manner, what we can do is we can see what's actually happening behind the scenes when we use the count function there. So by changing external ID to count of external ID, this is what's happening behind the scenes. It's converting those external IDs into a column full of ones, because of course for each pupil there is one external ID. And then the total, it's summarizing it up at the bottom to give us the total number of pupils in our school. Let me just add a few more columns to this. Let's add pupil premium. And there's two ways you can add that. You'll actually discover this yourself, but if you want to add pupil premium to a table or any other visualization, yes, you can drop it over values there, but you can also drop it on the visualization itself. And then that will add another column to the list down the side there. I'm going to put SEN status code on there as well, like that. And you can see we've built up a sort of a list of columns and whatever on our table visualization. Well, I find it's very useful when we do this to put maybe one of the visualizations up at the top above it. So I'm just clicking into some white space and then click on the column chart, and we get the placeholder for a column chart. What I can do now is I can start to build my column chart up. And remember, we've got this count of external ID, which is giving us 938. If on my column chart, I take external ID now, drop it onto value, it defaults to count of external ID. So that's where I've got my 938 from. If I want to, for example, add some idea of gender onto this graph, I can take gender and add it to the axis. So I'll have two sets of columns, one for the boys and one for the girls. And that gives me a breakdown like that. But it's useful to be able to see the data in here because we can understand a lot more what's going on. Now, we could carry on doing that as long as we wanted. But this becomes even more useful when we want to see what was happening with our attendance data. So what I'm going to do is do the same thing, but for our attendance data. Here's our attendance data. Let's open up a table visualization. And let's add that to the list. Let's put the page view on actual size so you can see what's happening. And if we add then to that, we'll add external ID, number of times absent, number of times present, and total marks. And straight away you can see how Power BI is totaling up, how it's producing these totals. See, when we give Power BI a number, it automatically wants to add those numbers up. If I go to the values section here and look on absent and click on the downward pointing arrow there, you can see what it's doing there as a summarization is adding them up. So it's adding all the absent points together. But you can see what happens if we want to change that to the average. Straight away, we get an average for that figure. And if we do the same with present. And also the same with total marks. So we can change these around, and a table gives us the ability to play around with our data and find out what Power BI is actually doing behind the scenes with these values, because it's these values that we're going to base all our graphs on. If you remember the contents of the lectures, and if you've covered this, we create a measure called percentage attendance. If I add that to the list, we can also see how it calculates percentage attendance. Now, I'm going to add to that some visualizations up at the top. I'm going to add to that a bar chart here up at the top. And I'm going to default on a stacked column chart. And I can choose the stacked column chart and I can put some averages on here. So for example, if I want to calculate the percentage attendance and put that on my column chart, I can choose percentage attendance, drop it in the values, release it, and there's my percentage attendance for the whole school. I can take the students by year and drop those into the axis and break it up into percentage attendance by year. Also gives me an opportunity to check out the differences between the different types of bar chart along the top, because we can change from one type of bar chart to the other. So here we are, and we're using the table visualization to give us an insight into what's actually happening behind the scenes. Now, Jane, I've noticed your comment there. Is there an easy way to get disadvantaged students, i.e. not including service children? There is, but I'm going to cover that next week if that's okay. So what I'm going to do next week is I'm going to focus a lot more on filters. And part of the filters, in fact, one of the filters I will use, because you've provided it as an example, is how we can get disadvantaged children, not including service children. So that's one of the examples I'll use next week. So yes, we will cover that, but that's going to be next week when we focus on filters. Okay, I'm going to go back to the front page here now of what I'm hoping that by the end of week 2, most of you will have. And one of the things that's very important, I think, as we create these visualizations, is going to be the ability to create really clear visualizations and think a lot about our end users. So what we've got at the moment, I think, is a bit of a dog's dinner of a report. I don't think it's particularly clear. I think it's a bit hiddledy-piddledy. And I would like to take this and make it a lot cleaner in terms of the data we've got. Now, I spoke during the lecture about cleaning the data. So it might be wise just for us to go back for a moment and talk about how we can clean the data. If you remember, when we first created this SEN pupils report, not SEN didn't exist as a label. And I've used the Power Query Editor to clean the data so that we don't have any blanks. I'll show you what I mean. If I go to Home and click on Edit Queries, it brings up what's called the Power Query Editor. And the Power Query Editor is almost a behind-the-scenes program. It's a separate program. You've probably noticed it comes up in its own box. But it allows us to clean the data, clean and shape the data. And that's something you'll hear a lot of talk on in Power BI forums and people who use Power BI regularly. This concept that when we get the data out of our source, be it SIMS or Excel or whatever, the data that we have is seldom perfectly clean. It contains missing data sometimes, or it contains data in the wrong format. And if our data does that, and yeah, there's lots of instances where SIMS data isn't perfect, we can use the Power Query Editor to make changes to that data. So what I've done in the courses is, in the lectures in the courses rather, is I've been through some of these and I've changed in LA Care, for example. I think as it comes out of SIMS, it just says a Y for pupils who are in LA Care, and we changed it to say not in LA Care for the majority of pupils. And I think there are 2 pupils in this data set who are in LA Care. It says just LA Care for them. And the reason why I changed it to say that is because Power BI uses what's in the data as the default column headings and default data labels in all the visualizations. So it makes a lot of sense to make sure that the data in our table makes as much English sense as possible. I didn't change, though, this one, EAL. At the moment, it says no and yes. I think that actually might be better being EAL and non-EAL. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to change it while we're on the webinar. And I'm going to change it by using the replace values option, which we can see here. So this is just right-clicking on the column header and click on replace values. And if we do that, it waits a minute, but we can change every occurrence of no to say not EAL and click OK. And you see it's now gone through that database and made that substitution. Let's do it again on all the pupils where EAL just says at the moment, just says yes. Oops. So let's replace that and say EAL. The advantage of doing this will now be that my graphs that graph the percentage of EALs and not EALs will actually have labels on them that will say EAL and not EAL. It won't say true or false or something sort of vague and maybe to our end users that isn't particularly informative. So when you're doing this in Power Query Editor, try and make the contents of each of these cells for each of these pupils as informative as possible. And I've been through here, yeah, and I've done gender. Sometimes with some schools, we've been through gender and we said, yeah, M and F, okay, we're a primary school, let's call them boys and girls. So again, we've done the same kind of thing, replace the values. So replace M with boys. Right click again and do the same thing. Replace F with girls. And Power Query Editor could do this very, very quickly. Okay, we're going to have 1,000 pupils on this list here. But Power Query and Power BI are very good at dealing with massive tables. We've got thousands, even millions, even billions of rows. Power Query is really geared up for making those changes. The other thing I'll sometimes do, and I don't, oh yes, here's an example. Let's try to think if there was an example. Notice under ethnicity here, we have some pupils where the ethnicity is missing. There's no ethnicity been entered. And on our graphs, if you can imagine that being graphed, what that will mean would be, for example, we might have a whole set of columns for white English, white Irish, Asian, and any other, and all the rest of it. We'll have a set of columns labeled for those, but we'll have one column, maybe with only 5 or 6 pupils in, that's got no label on it at all. And end users will say, well, who are these pupils? Well, we'll know that it's just the pupils probably who didn't get SIMS updated with whatever their parents returned, or maybe they've just not returned anything yet. So that's what these gaps mean. But here we can say, okay, well, if there are any gaps, we can fill that in. We can make a substitution. So again, with ethnicity, if I right click and click on replace values, I can say, okay, well, any that's just a space character on its own, I can replace it with not found or not entered or not supplied or whatever it might be. So I could do a find and replace there. Or, and here's an alternative way of doing it, if there's only a very small number of them, we can use the filters. Filters are also a really good way of understanding what data's in here. I mean, we've got 900 rows down here, so it's difficult for us to scan down it like this manually and figure out what all the different codes are. But if you use the little downward pointing arrow there, this tells you where all the different entries are into that column. So it's telling us that all these things have been entered. But what I could do, of course, is I could just say, well, just select these here, the ones for whom I don't have a code. So take that off and click that, and now click OK. Now it creates a list of pupils who don't have any ethnicity code entered. And if I want to, I can replace those spaces with non-supplied. Don't know, you could make this whatever you think is more suitable. And now that creates that for us. Now, if you do enter a filter here, before we close and apply it up here, and we'll do that last, but before we close and apply it, make sure you take the filter off, because this filter will actually filter down what it supplies to Power BI. So if I leave that filter on, then the whole of Power BI is just going to be thinking our school is made up of these 5 pupils that I have in the list now. So I'm going to remove the filters. So go back to the full list again. Whoops, let's just try that again. So I'll go to click on clear filter. Excuse me one moment. I'm actually just going to undo that step there by clicking on the red cross there and go back, and that should take me back. Take the filtered rows off. That takes me back here to this point there. So yeah, not quite sure why that didn't work, but yeah, usually clicking clear filter there takes all the filters off and takes us back to the situation we're in before. So that's one of the reasons why we'd want to clean our data. That's how we do it in pupil data. Some of the other files, we've got attendance data in here and whatever. Some of the other files, all you need to check is that the formats are correct here and here and here. Go back to pupil data. We've got the year group here, which initially was picked up as being a text field. So to make sure that Power BI saw it as a number, you click on the number and you just change it to one or the other, whichever one of these is appropriate. So that was cleaning the data. We can see what effect that's going to have now. If we go back to, for example, gender, where we've got boys and girls here, if I close and apply those changes now, so I have to close and apply, that will take us back into Power BI, and those changes will take place. Now look at the pupils by gender graph here. As it flashes and it says applying query changes, where we had F and M before, I'm hoping we get boys and girls. Now, once this has done its updating, just watching where it says pupils by gender, this should now update. It will now be graphing boys and girls. There we go. Let's change the colours. And we talked before about, or I talked during the lectures about the colours on here. I'm not a great fan of boys having to be blue and girls having to be pink on graphs. I think it's a bit silly myself. But we talked on the course about how you can change those colours. And we introduced this section here, the formatting section, where we can change data colours. So if you want to, you can make the girls a pinky colour and the boys a blue colour. And if that's your thing, then that's absolutely fine. I'm not keen on that, as you've gathered, and I think it's not because of any gender issues or whatever. It's more because I think colour on a Power BI visualization should be used very, very cautiously. Look what's happened now, because we've changed the colours on here. I bet anybody looking at this graph would immediately focus in on pupils by gender. I think using colours like this makes things stand out, and that can be what you want, but in this particular context, I don't think the pupils by gender graph is the most important thing, but because we've messed with its colours, because we've given it these colours, it's standing out like a sore thumb. So I would always make sure that really we use consistent colours, and we only, even to the point of using the same colour throughout our graph. In the actual lectures this week, I touched very briefly on this option here where you can switch themes. And I do recommend that you explore the switch themes option, because it does give you access to a lot of different color suggestions. Now, for some reason, I'm clicking on that and it's not doing anything. I was going to show you how you can swap different themes, but try it on your machine at home or at school and do switch the themes. Have a look at the marketplace for themes as well, because there are some cracking themes out there. And I find myself naturally being drawn to the themes that are almost monochrome in nature. You know, there's maybe a range of shades of blue or a range of shades of green, because I think those give us much more scope to use colours really to highlight problems, really to highlight issues. I want to use colours on my Power BI reports to draw everybody's attention to certain things. I want to guide the end user through my reports, and I'm going to use colour to do that. So yeah, that's why I think colours should be used very, very sparingly, if at all, in a report. Okay, right. So if anyone's got any questions, put them down at the bottom here. For the rest of the webinar, though, I was going to maybe talk about filters and introduce them really to you for the first time. We have used filters in reports, and many of you who've used Power BI before will be aware of these things called slicers. Filters, and certainly this filter pane here, as you can see it here, we can show it or hide it, whatever. This has appeared, really, this is a new development for July of 2019. So it's really absolutely the very latest thing that's appeared here. But it started to maybe take over from slicers. And I'll explain why during the course, maybe next week's course, and I'll talk about slicers in more detail. But the filters here, this pane is proving really useful. And I'd be interested to know what you think of this pane as you start to use it, but it's proving really useful. The reason why it's so useful is that it's very visual. It's very clear what's happening on here. We've got three separate sections to it. We've got the filters on the visual, filters on the page, and filters on all pages. And it allows us to set a filter for an individual visual. So I can set a filter for pupil premium, or for the entire page, that's this page here, this one that we call headlines, or I can set a filter for the whole of the report, which is filters on all pages there. So let's just have a look at putting a filter on an individual visual. Got pupil premium highlighted here, and that's great. I might want to create a copy of that visual and have a look at pupil premium at key stage 3, for example. So what I can do is, you probably know this yourself, but you can copy. So right click and copy a visual, and then you can use the paste option up here, hopefully. Oops. For some reason my paste button's not working. Let's try a Control V instead. Oh, there we go, Control V works. And that creates a copy of my pupil premium visual. I'm just going to take out the EAL visual for now and put this one next to it. So both of them at the moment are showing exactly the same figures, but I can set a filter on an individual visual. And with that pupil premium one highlighted, I'm going to select pupil premium just for the girls, for example. So I can take the gender here and drop it into the filters on this visual option here. And I can select just the boys or the girls, and the visual will update showing me the boys or the girls within that one visual. So that's filtering at the level of the visualization. But I can also filter at the level of the entire page. So if I take that out now and put gender, for example, into the filters on the page and choose the boys, what I've got now is the whole of this report is now filtered just on boys. And you see the gender breakdown there is just showing boys, pupil premium is just showing the boys, pupil premium, the ethnicity is just showing the boys' ethnicity. So that's filtering on a page. And I can do the same thing on the whole report. So if I have a multi-page report, I can still take gender and filter it across the entire report. Now, you used to be able to do all this before this new July update, but I think this is a much better way of doing it. It's very visual, and our end users can see exactly what's going on. And more to the point, they can change what's going on. We can allow them to choose just the boys or just the girls. We can also lock these if we don't want our end users to be able to make these changes. So that's something we're going to cover in next week's set of courses, and we'll be looking at these filters. And we'll also be looking at slices, which are another way of doing similar things on our group. So that's the plan. Hopefully you're finding the courses accessible and easy enough to use. I notice not many people are putting comments into the Facebook forum, but that's fine. It's only there if you want it. But please do use that Facebook forum. We use Facebook forums. You might be aware of it, but we have a SIMS assessment Facebook group as well. And that's got about 600 odd people on it. And it's provided a really good reservoir of comments and facts and techniques and whatever over the year. So it is very useful if people want to use it. Let's tell it to you. The other way of creating comments on the courses is at the bottom of the courses. Every lecture has got a comment section. Please feel free to use that. That would be great. And if you have any requests for things we can cover, and also last week requested that we do something around results for Results Day. So I'm preparing some results lectures for Results Day to allow us to see that data straight away and import it into Power BI. That's great. We'll do that. You let me know. If anyone's got any questions, I'm hanging around for the next few minutes, so I'm more than happy to answer any questions. If anybody wants to email me directly, please do. I'm more than happy to pick up the phone and talk to people if you have any specific problems. My aim is that everybody will be able to come away from this course with a really good, solid, working Power BI analysis of their own school's data. Okay, Jill, how can you put the year groups in age order? Aha, that's a good one. Yeah, I'll not show you how to do that now, but it is an issue because, of course, you'll have noticed that it puts them in number order because it's, as you can see down here, it spots that it's a number, so it automatically assumes that you want them in number order. And if it's not a number, if it's text, it assumes you want them in alphabetical order, which isn't necessarily the best way of doing it. Now, there are a couple of different ways that we can persuade it to put them in the right order, but they all need related tables setting up. And we've only just started talking about related tables. So, Jill, I will cover that for you in next week's set of courses. So I hadn't necessarily planned on doing it, but if you're from a primary school, you'll need to do that. And for secondary schools, there's other examples of that as well. Things like result sets, usually in alphabetical order, but not always. So we'll do that. So yes, I'll cover that next week, Jill, if that's okay with you. Okay, I'm going to leave it at that. My voice is about to give out. I've got a bit of a cold, so my voice is about to give out. But do contact me if there's anything else that we can help you with. That will be fine. Do contact us as soon as possible. Again, we've got another webinar next week. I think it's Monday or Tuesday, so it's a bit earlier than this one. I hope you can make it to the next webinar. It's been lovely to have you here today. Thank you for joining us. and I'll see you next time. Thank you.